To those affected, news about minimum wage adjustment has come both as good and somewhat untimely. Good, of course, to those whose disposable income will be adjusted upwards, and somewhat untimely to those employers who will bear the cost of this adjustment of the minimum wage. You're watching Week with me, Winston Mavoro, and my guest this evening is Felix Mwenge, a research fellow from the Zambia Institute for Policy Analysis and Research, ZIPA. And today we will be discussing the impact of the minimum wage adjustment, especially on the business sector. Welcome to Week, Felix.
Thank you, Winston.
Okay. Now to just kickstart the conversation, Felix, what impact does this upward adjustment of the minimum wage have on the business environment?
Thank you so much. Let me just with your permission, let me just give a brief background of what's a minimum wage and who's supposed to get a minimum wage, who qualifies for a minimum wage. The reason why I want to do this is because I want to put this into proper context. Because what you see lacking in our nation sometimes when we discuss these issues is that people don't know the context in which to discuss a number of issues. So a minimum wage is a pay that those workers we call general workers who do not belong to any union that qualify for. So when you go to a workplace, you are going to find different categories of workers. There are those workers that belong to a union. So if they want a salary adjustment, the union is going to speak for them, and they will have a salary adjustment. And then we have what we call a category of general workers. They are not represented by anybody. And in a day, given an employer who's, who doesn't care, they could actually work for nothing. So the minimum wage comes in. It's a government move to say, look, the guys who are not represented by a union also deserve good pay. So we are going to put a law in place which is going to dictate to say, this is the minimum they should be paid. So we are basically talking about security guards. We are talking about guys who lift heavy stuff in the workplaces, those kind of workers. You also find that these are the workers who do not have a lot of skills in a job. So basically they are using labor. We also classify them as elementary occupation. They are doing the very basic in an institution. So these are the people who qualify for a minimum wage. Okay? That is important for everyone to understand. Also that the minimum wage is used as a tool to fight poverty. What's on, you need to know that poverty levels in Zambia are very high. And unfortunately, even people who are in employment fall into poverty. There are people today who rise up early in the morning, go to work, come back at night, and they still can't afford to put food on the table. So the minimum wage comes in as a measure to say that, look, if people are going to work, can you ensure that at least they are paid something to enable them put food on the table? So when we discuss the minimum wage, I think it's important and very fair that we put the economy into context and who qualifies for the minimum wage.
I love those points that you've raised, Felix. And for those of you that are watching us live right now on Diamond TV, you can simply participate on the program by simply calling 0974-001218 and tender in your thoughts concerning this issue surrounding the minimum wage. And one of the things that you've said is that the minimum wage is a tool that is used to fight poverty. A very cardinal point right there. But you see, it brings a question to my mind. When we begin to look at the cost of living in Lusaka, as published by the JCTR, it hovers around 5,000, and then look at the current adjustment. The question then, does it really achieve the intended goal?
Well, firstly, the JCTR is just one institution that calculates the cost of living. We also have the Central Statistical Office. And speaking for me as a researcher, I think the Central Statistics figures are the official figures that we use to do our analysis. And so if I would say what the cost of living is, I'm going to base on the Central Statistical Office. Okay. I appreciate the work the JCTR does, but we tend to move with the CSO one. And there'll be debates here and there whether it reflects the actual situation on ground or not. But the fact of the matter is, even the CSO cost of living, even though it's lower than the JCTR, you find that the minimum wage may not even reach that one. In short, what I'm simply trying to say is government is making an effort to raise the wages of lowly paid workers, and it's not demanding that you pay them at the level of the cost of living. Because when you look at the data, actually the cost of living still remains higher than the minimum wage that is prescribed.
I love that point, Felix,
Exactly.
again. And now, coming to the question, I love the fact that, you've said government does not really force anybody to actually get to pay this minimum wage. Now, let us go back to my first question. What impact does it have on the businesses? Because ultimately, these are the employers, that, will have to factor in this cost as the adjustment was made.
Exactly. Good question again. I deviated, but I needed to have that background.
Quite understood.
For you to understand. So let's go this way. I'm going to make a submission based on a study we did on the previous minimum wage. Okay. So what you find is that, businesses are different. Okay. Today you walk into Lusaka, you find businesses which we classify as large scale, medium scale, and small scale. Okay? So when the minimum wage is introduced, it actually has different impacts on those different businesses. Some are small, some are big. So for the big businesses, actually what we found in our research, our inquiry on the 700 kwacha, the previous one, is that for the big businesses, it was like, okay, let's look on the paper. What is government demanding?
Just hold your thought over there. We've got a caller.
Exactly.
You're through to Biswick.
Sure.
Hello, you're through to Biswick. Okay.
Okay. Exactly. So I was saying that for bigger businesses, let's say the large scale, the big banks and all, it's easy to adjust because it's a matter of just looking at, the cost of production and making a small adjustment to be able to pay someone an extra 500 kwacha. But when we go down the lane to smaller businesses, paying an additional 500 kwacha is extremely difficult. So in our inquiry, what we found was that for smaller businesses, the adjustment took a lot of time. In some cases, people actually said, look, we can't do this business anymore because the cost of doing it is just going to be too high. And this is how it works. So your cost of production, regards the minimum wage, depends on the structure.
We've got a caller over there, Felix.
Sure.
You're through to Biswick. Good evening, you're through to Biswick. Good evening, you're through to Biswick. Okay. Please go ahead, Felix.
Exactly. So
We
I was
lost
saying,
that call.
if you are an establishment, and let's say 80% of your workers are general workers, people that qualify for the minimum wage, it is going to be very burdensome for you to adjust and pay everyone the minimum wage. But if you're a big business who only have a percentage of general workers in your establishment, it's easy to adjust. What I'm saying is, for example, take a security firm. Now, nearly all security guards are classified as general workers. So if you have 100 security guards and the minimum wage is adjusted upwards, you are basically saying you double the wages of all your workers. So that's where it becomes very difficult. So if your establishment has more general workers, you'll be hit harder by the minimum wage. If you have a small percentage, it's something that you can manage. Also, if your business is small, it may take long to adjust.
We've got Johns from Kitwe trying to get through to contribute to the program. Johns, you're through to Biswick.
Hello, good evening.
Yes, Johns, you're through to Biswick.
Yes, good evening.
Good evening. What is your contribution?
Yeah, my contribution is that I'm going to give a scenario. I'm a small-scale tracker.
Okay.
I've got 5 lorries, trucks. I've employed 5 drivers, 4 mechanics, 6 car fitters, who may be general workers, 4 security guards. And these guys are paid at least 2,000 plus. Now, the cost of doing business I'm saving, if I send 2 trucks on one way along the Great North Road, there are 3 pockets. I pay 150 each truck. Now there are 5 of them. 150 by 5, one way. Then you come back on the same route. You pay another 150 by 5. Maybe on the same day. Maybe they're shifting maybe soybeans from a farmer from Mundola to Kabwe. Then when going, they will have to pay 150 each truck. They come back, will pay 150. And then there is a minimum wage without informing me to be prepared. To say, okay, man, this is the situation. In the next 3-4 months, we are going to effect this minimum wage. Then me, I was going to adjust. But the best way, since they said it is on the 10th of September, it is effected. By the month end, instead of me increasing that salary, I'll simply write to the labor office that I'm reducing labor on these guys and then tell them 1 month in lieu of notice, about 5, 6 of them, they will lose employment. And the government is there advocating for creation of employment. Which what have they done? Because that's what I'm planning to do. Because I'm not prepared. I'm caught unaware.
Thank you very much for coming through. Thank you very much for coming through, Jones. And that is a very valid contribution, issue to do with the cost of doing business, and, this sort of coming abrupt without being given necessary time to prepare with regards, making sure that the cost is factored in. What are your thoughts on that?
Firstly, Jones is such a patriotic citizen. If you get his question, he's not complaining about paying the minimum wage. I love this man. He's actually complaining about not being notified ahead of time. Winston, I should say that in our research, one of the things we tell government is that, coming up with a law is one thing. Ensuring that it's implemented is another. And implementation is a process. I think it's fair that people are notified ahead of time. In the paper that I'm talking about, we actually advise government to say, if you're going to make an adjustment which sounds too big, can you phase the increments? For example, if we're going to increase by 500 kwacha, can we do 200 in the first year, the other 200 in the second year, and the 100 kwacha in the third year? That's same as just telling people to say that in the next 6 months, adjust your labor costs because the minimum wage is coming.
So those of you that are watching us live on Facebook, you can simply contribute and also drop your thoughts over there and get to participate on the discussion that we're looking at today, which is bordering on the just newly revised minimum wage. And those of you that are watching us live on TV, you can simply call 0974-001218 to simply tender in your comments and thoughts on this particular important subject. Now, at this time, we get to hear from the manufacturers, the people actually who also employ quite a significant of these general workers, just to get to feel how, they think, concerning this newly revised minimum wage. Okay, before we get into that, we've got a caller and we need to take this one just to get to feel what the public also thinks about this. You're through to Bizweek.
Hello.
Good evening, you're through to Bizweek. What is your contribution? And please keep it brief.
My contribution is that just to find out who does the minimum wage apply to? Because you have seen a lot of foreign companies trying to fix employees. You find a mechanic is paid the minimum wage of, minimum wage is 500, then they just pay him
Remember to keep your question brief, please.
We are paying you above minimum wage. And that really doesn't make sense. So we really appreciate what the minister there has done.
Okay, thank you very much for that contribution. So getting back to just what the manufacturers are saying concerning the minimum wage.
A number of different types of responses from the general public and also from manufacturers. Now, from a manufacturing perspective, we're definitely not against increments in the minimum wage. However, our area of contention is in the consistency of policy and the ability of manufacturers and the general public to meet the cost of the increment. basically we are calling on the Ministry of Labor to ensure that when we're implementing policies that are as cardinal as this one, we do look at a number of fundamentals, including the economic climate, as well as the ability to pay by employers. I think from the outset that has been our major area of discussion with the Ministry of Labor, just simply highlighting that an increment in the minimum wage at this point in time of 50% actually translates into an increase in the cost structure, and the fact that there has been no time for adjustments to be made by manufacturers and even by their service providers. So this would translate into a higher cost of production, which will be passed on to consumers and result in a higher cost of goods at the end of the day. And we do expect that in a few months down the line, we will see an increasing level of unemployment on the Zambian market, and I do believe that's not the intention of the Ministry of Labor in actually enacting this increment. So we do call for more dialogue and consultation with the private sector to ensure that going forward we develop a mechanism that is predictable and consistent for increments in minimum wage, and that will allow us as industry and as private sector stakeholders to adjust our cost structures accordingly and ensure that we're offering more equitable employment to the Zambian people.
The issue of unemployment resurfacing, again, the issue of the possibility of, increased cost of goods also emanating from there. In less than a minute, your thoughts?
I totally agree with the manufacturers. And again, the point they make is that they needed time to adjust to this. It's sudden, and I think that everyone should appreciate, the role of preparedness. You need to prepare for, these are costs that are going to affect a lot of other things within the establishment. So I think that maybe going forward in future, what government should do is to announce the minimum wage 6 months before it actually is due.
Before my director, kills me, Felix, one last question.
Yes.
How best could this have been done, looking at the current economic circumstances that, govern the business conditions in this country?
Exactly. 2 points, actually. So the first one is to phase the implementation. So if you increase the minimum wage by 50%, I mean, mandating people to pay it suddenly, like the manufacturers are saying, is actually very difficult. So why don't you phase it over, let's say, 3 years? Okay, so if the increment is 600 kwacha, can we pay our workers 200 kwacha extra in year 1? Another 200 kwacha, so it becomes 400 kwacha in year 2. And eventually pay the all of it in year 3. So that the adjustment, so the impact is spread over 3 years. That will minimize the impact. Then the second thing is, if you follow the trends of minimum wage adjustments, they really take a lot of time. So we advise that can we shorten the periods before another adjustment?
Thank you very much for coming through to Biz with Felix. It's been a pleasure hosting you.
Thanks,
But of course, the conversation goes on, and we will definitely find time to still look at this crucial topic concerning the minimum wage. As you may know, that Zambia's current economic standing, of course, has got a lot of issues that are going on in there that, of course, we can't start elaborating at this particular time. But for those of you that were watching us on Facebook, thank you very much for being with us. And remember, you can keep the conversation going, as definitely we will find time to bring back Felix from the Zambia Institute for Policy Analysis and Research to come and conclusively look at how best can this minimum wage be implemented, looking at where we are as a country, of course taking into account the issues to do with the fiscal side and also the subdued economic growth that currently surrounds Zambia. My name is Wenson Mavoro. You've been watching Biz Week. Have a lovely evening.